What's up, people? We're here today to unbox the KDK Nodoka ceiling fan. Intelligent motor drive system, stepless LED brightness. But what's really cool is the Wi-Fi smart control. It means you can control your fan anytime. Let's test this out. Works with smartphones. This is impressive. The KDK Nodoka fan. I'm happy about this, and you will be too. Log on to kdk.com.my to know more. Fans for life.
This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
Inside Story on BFM 89.9.
Good evening. This is Inside Story with Lee Chui Lin and Shamila Ganesan. Tonight, the debate over when to raise the minimum wage in Malaysia and what effect it might have.
First, we talk about how raising the minimum wage would make a difference to workers and employees and why it's important. Then, what effects might this have on the economy? Finally, how do our wages compare to other countries?
So we want to know, do you think we should raise minimum wages by Q2 of this year? You can call us 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899 and tweet us at BFM Radio. This is Inside Story. It is 6:07. So to start at the beginning, as you know, this question of raising minimum wage is something that has come up a fair amount. But now it's not so much about raising it as it is the timing of it. So we've seen the Malaysian Trades Union Congress, or MTUC, urging the government to raise the minimum wage by the second quarter of this year instead of by the end of 2022, as was previously discussed. The Deputy President, Effendi Abdul Ghani, says that, with the rise of basic food prices, the increase of minimum wage should be done as soon as possible. He also asked why it's being held off until the end of the year and that increments should be carried out by the second quarter of 2022 at the latest. Now, if you've listened to enough employment and wage stories, you will know that when the MTUC speaks, the MEF responds, and vice versa, which is where the second part of the story kicks in.
You took my intro to the whole thing. So I was going to say, where there's a standoff, there's always another party. But yes, the Malaysian Employers Federation, or MEF, their president has rebutted this, says that it's not the time to implement that proposed new 1,500 minimum wage. And he's basically pointing to the pandemic as a reason, because we're still in economic recovery. He said that Malaysian businesses aren't ready for this new minimum wage, given that they've weathered a lot of economic shocks and pandemic as well as the floods, actually. And he pointed out a few things. He said that establishing a new minimum wage line would push up the costs of goods and services, increase operational costs, that this would aggravate how businesses are operating, but also will, of course, have an impact on the consumer. He pointed out that it might even force businesses to close. And one thing that he said that's getting a lot of attention, he added that this new minimum wage would only benefit foreign labor, because he says by and large, most Malaysians are already being paid higher than 1,500 ringgit. And therefore, raising this current minimum wage to 1,500 would really only benefit foreign workers, and therefore will increase the outflow of money. So I think that's essentially the two sides of this argument, and really circling the point of, as you said, when this should come into effect.
There's also the push and pull between people versus more what's the word I'm looking for? Umbrella issues, I suppose, like the economy. Because aside from, because this is framed or getting framed as a worker versus employer kind of situation, but there is also the question of, what knock-on effects would this have for the economy, which is the argument that's being put forward, right, in terms of pushing up goods and services, increasing operational costs, and just kind of cascading that onwards. There's also, I feel like every time we talk about anything like this question of how will it affect businesses? Can we afford for more of them to close? These are the things that always come up. So I think looking at that, it seems to me that timing is an interesting question, particularly because of the phase that we are currently in, where we are simultaneously acting like everything is back to normal, while at the same time, nothing really is. We're seeing this in terms of the supply chain interruptions. We're seeing this in the fact that, of course, we still wear masks. People are still encouraged to distance. You still have people in some spaces operating at less than full capacity. So you have all these things going on. But at the same time, the assumption is that everything is back to normal and we should just now focus on recovery. And I think that is another element to this debate about what is the right thing to do and for whom. Who does it benefit?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's worth asking, is there ever going to be the perfect time to put something like this in place? And when we talk about recovery, we do talk about businesses recovering, but on the other hand, we are also hearing about individuals who are struggling, people who have to feed their families, people who have lost their savings because they couldn't work for an extended amount of time. And so, of course, on a person-to-person, employee-to-employee level, raising that minimum wage offers a lot of benefits to be had. So I can see both sides of the argument. And I mean, I am interested to see, as you said, what the larger ramifications of implementing this earlier rather than later could be.
So we'd like to hear from you. Do you think we should raise minimum wages by Q2 of this year, as opposed to end of the year, because that's what's being called for? You can call us 7733-2900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at PFM Radio. After this, we're going to be joined by Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO at the Center for Market Education. Keep it here on Inside Story, BFM 89.9.
Boleh for Malaysia. Ha. BFM 89.9, the business station.
It is 6:14 and you're listening to Inside Story with Lynn and Shamila. Today we're talking about raising the minimum wage in the country and specifically when is the right time to do so. So MTUC, the Malaysian Trades Union Congress, has called for the government to raise the wage by the second quarter of the year, Q2, rather than the end. Meanwhile, the Malaysian Employers Federation has said it's not the right time. Malaysian businesses are not ready for this. We'd like to hear from you. Do you think that we should raise minimum wages by Q2 of the year? You can call us 7733-2900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at BFM Radio. So we're starting off by getting the lay of the land. Joining us to do this is Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO at the Center for Market Education. Carmelo, good to have you with us.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, firstly, what are the principles behind reviewing the minimum wage? Why is it an important and necessary exercise?
Well, I don't believe that is a necessary exercise. There is a ratio behind for the people that are asking for it, that is trying to keep the wages and salaries of workers at the pace with the rising cost of living. So this is the ratio behind. Having said that, I guess that just rising the minimum wage is probably not the best way to do that, at least looking at the potential unintended consequences.
Before we perhaps get into the details of that, how often is the minimum wage rate reviewed and subsequently increased?
I think that there is nothing really compulsory at this perspective within the Malaysian regulation. So I guess that is mostly arising as part of the debate on political economy within the country.
So the last increase was in 2020. And at the time, actually, we heard many of the same arguments being trotted out. One side saying it's not going to be enough. The other side saying businesses will shutter. So what's known so far about the impact that this has had really over the last 2 years, acknowledging that they were pandemic years?
Yeah, of course. And consider 2020, the year in which minimum wage was raised, was the year in which the mean average income fall down by 9% and the median income fall down by 15%. So the raise of minimum wage was against the trend of salaries in the country. I think that there are, I would say, several perspective to look at this matter, and the most important, I think, is to ask ourselves who are the people that eventually earn below the minimum wage, and why. So the main risk that I see, and this is quite well treated in literature, is that because the people earning low wages are unskilled workers, so in technical terms, people that cannot command higher wages because of the skills that they possess, the risk is by raising too much the minimum wage is to create an incentive to replace those workers with machines. So these people, rather than growing from 10 to 15, they go from 10 to 0 because they are replaced by machine. It was the case a few years ago with many parking lots where the people collecting the fee for the parking were replaced by autopay machines. So if we really want to care about the welfare of workers, we should carefully determine the replacement point between worker and machine.
What are your thoughts on the recent announcement that the minimum wage will be increased to 1,500 by the end of 2022?
I think that we all know that the whole world is undergoing an inflationary crisis. So there are inflationary pressures, and with the economy advancing toward the recovery, there is the risk that prices are going even higher than what we experience now. And so I see the good intention of protecting the living conditions of the workers. But again, the way to hell is paved of good intentions, unfortunately.
So, I mean, let's talk then about that additional 300, right? Because that's really what we're debating. What difference will it make, and what are some knock-on effects to consider?
I think that we should not look at it in an aggregate way. And I think that is misleading to determine that every business should increase this minimum wage. We should leave it at the market. So there are companies, firms that probably can afford to do that, and they are in the position to do that. There are others that cannot. But the government, being a central agency, cannot know who can do it and who cannot do it. So leave this to the negotiation between the workers and the companies. And as someone else also claimed, I think that probably a better way to improve the condition of the workers is to allow them a higher degree of mobility between different jobs. This would create competitions among different employers to get the best workers. And this would push the wages up in a natural way. So it would be competition driven rather by law driven. And this would create permanent conditions for that salaries to be higher because the economy can sustain that higher salaries, not simply because the government or some federation have decided so.
In terms of then ensuring that that process of negotiation, for instance, happens, how can we ensure that it happens on a fair level?
Again, it's not easy, but that's why I push for worker mobility. Because if the worker has the chance to change his employment condition, and if the worker is a good worker, a valuable worker, then is a very strong weapon in the end of the worker. Of course, as far as the worker is linked to a certain job, his passport is detained by an immigration agency, then obviously there are no conditions for a fair negotiation. And I think mobility of labor is the basic conditions to ensure that kind of negotiation.
And considering that, then, do we have sufficient mechanisms, or rather, what mechanisms do we have in place to ensure that companies don't or would not exploit workers?
We don't have many. Of course, we can always improve in terms of enforcement. But what I see for the future of ASEAN, so looking a little bit more in a futuristic way, is for ASEAN to experience what was experienced is also today experienced by the European Union, where there is a full mobility within the country members for not only for capitals but also for people, not only as tourists but also as workers. So that within ASEAN, workers can freely move. That is, I think, the direction where sooner or later we will have to go.
So I wanted to pick on something you mentioned earlier about how the bulk of people earning below the minimum wage are unskilled workers. So the MEF has said that any increase will only benefit essentially those, and that these are mostly foreign workers. Is that a fair assessment of our situation here?
I think that it corresponds mostly to the truth, and the ministry said that the people earning below that wages is only 8.8% of the workforce. So also this has to be looked at with sound realism, and I think it is fairly true to say that also because it's more difficult for a company to pay someone below the minimum wage when that employee is a local person, so protected by a different set of rights by law.
So, acknowledging that, you've mentioned earlier on that market forces, negotiations in companies between workers and employers and so on should probably be the way to move forward. We do know that these discussions to increase minimum wage are likely going to happen. The question is when. So MTUC President, Deputy President Effendi Abdul Ghani has asked why it can't be implemented sooner. Can you talk to us about the importance of timing here, particularly in light of the pandemic?
Well, again, is complicated for several reasons. In salaries, wages are usually defined as sticky. That means that they change both upward and downward at a slower pace with the other prices. Okay, but at the same time, whenever we have an economic crisis, we have pressures to increase wages to help people navigating through the crisis. And when there is an economic recovery, we have pressures again to increase wages because prices are rising. So we incur the risk that we have only upward pressures for wages, and this obviously is a source of difficulties for employers. So there is not a general moment which is good for everybody. A certain moment is good for a certain company, another moment is not good for the same company. So again, every policymaker cannot grasp fully the conditions that are emerging from the market, and that's why the outcome should be left to the market, not because the market determines a perfect outcome, but because is better than any other outcome that is decided by a single person or a single authority, because of the amount of knowledge that is dispersed within the market.
Carmelo, what would you like to leave us with?
That I think I have two concluding thoughts. One is consider carefully inflation as the result of monetary policy. So we have an issue with the amount of money supply in the market. As far as we don't address that, we will not be able to address properly inflation and therefore the cost of living.
Carmelo, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thanks to you for having me.
That was Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO at the Center for Market Education, weighing in on this issue, the complex issue, as he rightly points out, of minimum wages. Now, this is coming because of a back and forth between the MTUC and MEF. MTUC has asked the government to raise minimum wages by Q2. Rather than the end of 2022. Meanwhile, MEF has said it's simply not time to do so. Businesses cannot accommodate this. So we'd like to hear from you. Should we raise minimum wages by Q2 of this year? Is this something you would welcome? You can call us 7733 2900, WhatsApp 018 789 8899, tweet us at BFM Radio. We have a lot of messages.